Close your eyes. Take a slow, easy breath in and let it go. Tonight, you are not going anywhere urgent. You do not need to solve anything. You do not need to remember anything. All you need to do is follow a voice and let it carry you somewhere very far away and very, very long ago. Imagine that time is not a straight line. Imagine that time is more like a slow river, and that somewhere on that river there is a city, a great city, a city that never fully disappeared because its stones are still beneath our feet, and its ideas are still inside our words, and its way of watching the stars is still somehow alive in the part of us that looks up at a clear night sky and feels something ancient stir inside. That city is Rome. Not the Rome of battles and emperors, not the Rome of conquest and marble speeches. Tonight, we are visiting the other Rome, the quiet Rome, the Rome that existed every single evening after the last customers left the market stalls, after the bread ovens cooled, after the children were called in from the streets. The Rome where a person sat near a lamp and let the day dissolve. This is a journey through a single Roman night. We will walk the streets as the sun goes down. We will smell the oil lamps flickering in the windows. We will feel the warmth of the bathhouses rising through the stone. We will lie in Roman beds and look up at Roman ceilings and listen to the sounds a Roman city made when the world grew dark and the stars came out one by one above the ancient hills. There is nothing here that will alarm you. There are no battles tonight, no politics, no urgent news from the frontier. Tonight, the only frontier is the one between wakefulness and sleep, and we are going to cross it together, gently, the way the Romans themselves crossed it every evening without even trying. So let your shoulders drop a little. Let your hands rest where they are. Let your breathing find its own pace, slow and even, like a tide going out. And when you are ready, let Rome come to you. It is waiting just beyond the edge of the known day. It has been waiting 2,000 years. It is patient, it is warm, and tonight, it is yours. Imagine the sun. Not the sharp high sun of midday, not the sun that bleaches everything white and drives people into doorways to catch a thin slice of shade. Imagine the sun in its final hour, low and golden and slow. The sun that turns ordinary stone walls into something that glows like warm bread. In Rome, this hour had a quality that is very difficult to describe to someone who has never experienced a world without electric light. We live now in a world where darkness is a switch away from brightness, where the difference between night and day is measured in seconds. But in Rome, the transition from day to night was long and gradual and deeply felt. It began hours before the stars appeared. It began when the shadows started to stretch. The streets of Rome were narrow in most neighborhoods, winding between buildings that rose several stories above the cobblestones. And as the sun dipped lower in the west, those narrow streets would first lose their direct light, while the upper stories of the buildings above still caught the full gold of the late afternoon. It created a strange and beautiful effect. Walking through those lower passages, the world above was still bright. The world at street level was already cooling, already shading toward purple and grey, already exhaling the warmth it had stored all day. The market sellers knew this moment. They had been on their feet since well before sunrise. Some of them had walked miles to reach the city, carrying baskets of goods balanced on their shoulders or loaded onto small carts. They had called out their prices through the heat of the day. They had bargained and measured and wrapped. And now, as the shadows reached the upper stories, they began the quiet work of closing down. Awnings were rolled back up. Empty baskets were stacked. The last of the bread that had not sold was set aside for the evening meal. Unsold fish was wrapped carefully in wet cloth. The sound of the market, which had been a constant living roar since morning, a roar of voices and hammers and animals and wheels on stone, that sound began to thin. Individual voices became distinguishable again, where before they had blurred into a single noise. You could hear one woman laughing. You could hear a child asking a question. You could hear the sound of a wooden shutter being pulled closed somewhere above. The city was remembering how to be quiet. This was not a sudden silence. It was gradual. Layer by layer, the sounds of commerce and daylight were folded up and put away, the way you might fold up a cloth at the end of a long day of work. Carefully, without hurry, with a certain satisfaction that comes from a thing being finished. And then the lamps began to appear. In the windows of the apartments above the street, in the doorways of the wine shops that would stay open a little longer, in the small niches cut into the walls at street corners where little clay figures of household gods stood watching the neighborhood, and where a small lamp was kept burning through the night as a kind of offering, a kind of comfort, a small flame to remind the gods that the people who lived here still remembered them. The lamps of ancient Rome burned olive oil, and olive oil, when it burns, has a smell unlike anything else. It is not unpleasant. In fact, there is something very old and very deep in the human nose that responds to it. Something that knows, without needing to think about it, that a burning oil lamp means warmth and shelter and the end of the working day. It is a smell that says, "You can rest now." It is a smell that says, "The day has done what it could, and now the night will take over, and the night asks very little of you." The Romans had no word, as far as we know, for the specific feeling of the city lowing down at dusk. But they must have felt it. They must have noticed, evening after evening, the way the quality of the air changed, the way the light changed, the way even the sounds from the hills outside the city seemed to carry differently once the sun was gone, as if the darkness itself was a kind of amplifier for the small sounds that daylight drowned out. A dog barking somewhere distant, a cart on a road outside the walls, the sound of water in a fountain which had been there all day but which you only truly heard now in the quiet. The Romans were extraordinarily attentive to water. The city was threaded through with aqueducts and pipes and fountains, and water ran day and night through the public basins where people came to fill their jugs. At dusk, the sound of that running water became more present, more noticeable, as if the water had been speaking all day and you had only just started listening. Perhaps that is what dusk is in any era. The hour when we start listening again. When the noise of doing falls away and something older and quieter begins to be heard. The sun was going down over Rome, the oil lamps were coming on one by one in the windows, the shadows were filling the narrow streets from the bottom up, and somewhere, in a million small apartments and houses, people were setting down whatever they had been carrying all day, and beginning, without quite deciding to, the long, slow business of becoming still. There is a particular feeling that belongs to the walk home at the end of a long day. Your body knows this walk differently than it knows the morning walk. In the morning, the body is alert to possibility. It holds itself slightly forward, slightly ready, as if it might need to respond to something at any moment. But in the evening, the body walks differently. The steps are heavier, the gaze is softer. The mind, instead of reaching ahead toward the day, is slowly releasing what the day contained. Romans walked this walk too. The city was large enough that many people had to travel a meaningful distance between where they worked and where they slept. Some people lived above the workshops where they worked, pressed closely against the warm walls of their trade. But many others, especially those who worked at the docks or at the public markets, or for wealthier households in the better neighborhoods, had to make their way home through streets that were now filling with the particular bustle of evening transition. Picture yourself making this walk. Your sandals are familiar with these stones by now. You know the stretch of street where the pavement dips slightly to the left. You know the corner where a particular baker always leaves a few unsold rolls near the door at the end of the day. You know the building where a large dog lives who barks at strangers but by now knows you and only lifts his head briefly as you pass. These small, repeated landmarks of a daily walk are not glamorous, but they are the architecture of a life. They are the things that make a place feel like yours. The neighborhoods of Rome were dense with this kind of familiarity. The insula, the multi-story apartment buildings that most Romans actually called home, were stacked with families who had known each other for years. The family on the floor above, who argued every evening around dinner time. The old man on the ground floor, who always seemed to be sitting in the doorway, watching the street with an expression of deep, philosophical satisfaction. The young woman on the same landing who kept a small pot of herbs on the windowsill and whose cooking smells drifted down the stairwell every evening like a friendly announcement. These were not strangers. These were the texture of ordinary Roman life. As you climb the stairs of your building, the sounds of the street below fade gradually. The particular smell of your building takes over. Every building had its own smell, composed of the accumulated meals and lives and small habits of all the people inside it. Smoke, bread, wool. The particular kind of stone dust that never quite left, no matter how much you swept. You push open the door to your rooms. The space inside is not large. Most Romans who were not wealthy lived in relatively modest quarters, perhaps one room that served multiple purposes, with a raised wooden sleeping area separated from the rest by a curtain. The windows, if there were windows, would be small, covered with wooden shutters or oiled cloth. But what strikes you when you come home to these rooms is not their smallness. What strikes you is that they are yours. The lamp in the corner, the folded blanket on the bed, the small clay figure of a household god on its little shelf, which you or someone before you in this house placed there because it felt right, to mark the space as protected, as cared for, as belonging to someone who cared about it. You set down whatever you have been carrying, a bag, a coat, the weight of the day. And there is that moment, that particular moment that belongs to all humans in all eras, where the body registers that it does not have to keep going. The shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches, the breath, which has been doing its work all day without being asked to think about it, seems to deepen very slightly, as if it too has been holding something back and is only now letting it go. From somewhere in the building comes the sound of an evening meal being prepared, the clatter of a pot, the hiss of something placed in hot oil, the smell of garlic or rosemary, or the particular savory sweetness of onions cooked down very slowly over a low flame. You are home. The city is still out there beyond the walls of these rooms. The dogs are barking somewhere distant. A cart is rumbling along a street a few blocks away. The fountain is running. Rome is still doing what Rome does, enormous and ancient and indifferent to the small private facts of your life. But in here, there is stillness. In here, there is the lamp and the folded blanket and the smell of the evening meal and the knowledge that tomorrow is not yet a problem. In here, you can simply be a person at the end of a day. And that is enough. That has always been enough. The evening meal in Rome was not a complicated affair for most people. It was not meant to be. After a long day of movement and noise, the body does not want complexity. It wants something warm, something familiar, something that does not require effort to appreciate. The Romans understood this in a way that was not theoretical, not written down in any philosophy text, but simply lived evening after evening in the accumulated wisdom of ordinary people who knew what made a tired body feel better. Bread was at the center of almost everything. If you lived in Rome and had reasonable means, you would have bought your bread that morning. There were bakeries throughout the city, proper bakeries with large stone mills and wide clay ovens. And the bread they produced ranged from the very coarse, heavy, dark bread made from less refined grain to softer, lighter loaves available to those who could pay more. But all of it had the quality that good bread has always had, the ability to make any meal feel complete. Bread soaked in olive oil. This is perhaps the most ancient combination in the world that still exists almost unchanged in Mediterranean kitchens today. The Romans dipped their bread in oil the way we reach for butter without thinking. The oil would have been present in almost every household. And in the evening, after a long day, a piece of bread torn from a loaf and dipped in oil and perhaps sprinkled with a little salt was a thing of profound, simple satisfaction. There would often be olives. The olive in ancient Rome was as everyday as the olive has always been in this part of the world. Packed into clay jars in brine or in oil or preserved with herbs, olives were something you ate without ceremony. You reached into the jar and took some. You placed them on the table next to the bread. You ate them slowly, because there is something about an olive that encourages slowness. The pit inside demands attention. You cannot rush an olive. Fish was common, particularly for people who lived anywhere near water. Salted fish, dried fish, fish packed in the briny fermented sauce the Romans called garum, a deeply savory depth of flavor that went into almost everything. Fruit was part of the evening meal when in season. Figs, soft and intensely sweet when fully ripe. Grapes, eaten fresh in season or dried into raisins that kept through the winter. Pears, pomegranates. For a Roman, the arrival of fig season was a genuine event. The first ripe figs were something you anticipated, something you ate with appreciation rather than with the mild indifference that comes from year-round availability. And then there was wine. Wine in Rome was the everyday drink of working people. It was watered down, almost always. Adding water to wine was not considered a weakness or a dilution of pleasure. It was simply how wine was drunk. A ratio of 2 or 3 parts water to 1 part wine was common. The result was something mild, slightly fruity, slightly acidic, pleasantly warming on a cool evening. It was a drink for conversation, a drink for the end of the day, a drink that said, The working hours are over, and now we are just people sitting together in the lamplight, and there is nowhere we need to be. The meal was eaten without great ceremony in most households. Things were placed on the table and eaten in whatever order seemed right. People talked, or sat in comfortable silence, or listened to the sounds coming through the window from the street below. And as the meal concluded, as the bread was gone and the olives were finished and the wine jug was set aside, something began to happen in the body that is so familiar to us that we have almost stopped noticing it. The warmth of the food spreading from the stomach outward. The slight heaviness that comes when the body knows it has been fed. The gradual softening of every tension that had been held in the muscles through the long day. The Romans sat there in their lamplight in their small warm rooms smelling of oil and bread, and the last of the evening, and their bodies began the long, slow surrender to the night. The flame in the lamp flickered slightly as someone moved across the room. The streets outside were quieter now. The last of the market sounds had long since faded. And somewhere between the last bite of bread and the first moment of true stillness, the day was over. Not with a bang, not with any announcement, just the quiet way that all days end when the body finally gets a chance to say, "We have done enough for today. We have been enough. Now let us rest. Let us go somewhere warm." Before dinner, or sometimes after, many Romans made a journey that was one of the great pleasures of ancient urban life. A journey that took them through the cooling evening streets to a building that glowed from within with heat and steam and the particular quality of light that warm water creates when lamplight touches it. The bathhouse. There is almost nothing in modern life that exactly corresponds to the Roman bathhouse experience. We have gyms with saunas, we have day spas, we have hot tubs, but none of these quite capture what the Roman bathhouse was, which was something simultaneously more social and more solitary than any of these things. You would have approached it from outside, and the first thing you would have noticed was the warmth. Even on the street several buildings away, you might have felt the slight difference in temperature that radiated from a large bath complex. The Romans heated their baths with a remarkable engineering system called the hypercaust, where hot air from furnaces beneath the building was channeled under the floors and through hollow walls, turning the entire structure into a kind of radiant oven. Stepping inside from the cool evening air was, immediately, a physical event. The frigidarium was the cold room. Some people began here, stepping briefly into the cold plunge pool as a kind of shock to the system, but most people moved quickly through it, eager for what came next. The tepidarium was the warm room. This was where many bathers spent the longest time. The temperature was not extreme. It was the temperature of a warm embrace, of a very good blanket, of the air above a bread oven after the baking is done. The floors were warm underfoot, which changed everything. There is something about warmth rising from below, from the ground itself, that is uniquely comforting. It touches a very deep animal part of us that knows warm ground means safety. Warm ground means the cold will not reach you here. People sat in the tepidarium and talked, or sat in companionable silence, or had their bodies scraped and oiled by attendants. The Romans did not use soap as we understand it. They covered their bodies with oil, then used a curved metal tool called a strigil to scrape the oil away along with the sweat and dirt of the day. The process was slow and thorough and, from accounts we have, extraordinarily satisfying. There is something about the physical sensation of being slowly cleared of the accumulated grime of a working day that goes beyond simple hygiene. It is a kind of release, a shedding, the day being physically removed from the surface of your skin. And then the caldarium, the hot room. Here the steam was thick enough that figures across the room were shapes rather than faces. Here the heat was something you felt in your lungs as well as on your skin, a deep, penetrating warmth that reached into muscles and found the tension there and began, patiently, to dissolve it. Your shoulders, which have been carrying the day since before sunrise, begin to release. Your neck, which has been holding your head upright and alert through every hour of noise and movement and decision, begins to soften. Your legs, which have walked the hard stones of Rome for hours, begin to feel the specific relief that comes from being still while warm, the relief that reminds you just how much work your body has been doing without complaint. There were pools of warm water to lie in, not swimming pools in the modern sense. These were pools for floating, for resting, for existing in the warm water without any particular purpose. To lie in a warm pool of water is to experience one of the oldest forms of comfort available to the human body. We floated before we were born. Something in the body remembers this. Something in the body recognizes the feeling of being held by warm water as a very fundamental form of safety. The sounds in the caldarium were muffled by steam and stone. Voices were lowered without anyone deciding to lower them. The particular acoustic quality of a room full of hot, wet stone and water and steam created a world that was interior and hushed. Outside, Rome was still Rome. The dogs were still barking, the carts were still making their way through the streets. But in here, none of that was present. In here, there was only the heat, the water, the slow drip of condensation from the ceiling, the sound of your own breathing, which without your noticing had deepened and slowed to the pace of someone who has stopped hurrying. After the caldarium, some bathers returned to the tepidarium to cool gradually rather than stepping immediately into the cold night air. This transition was important. The body, having opened itself to the heat, to the warmth, to the dissolution of its held tensions, needed time to close gently back toward itself. Many Romans, stepping out of the bathhouse into the evening, reported feeling a kind of lightness. Not the lightness of energy, not the alertness of the morning, but something different. The lightness that comes from having been thoroughly, completely comfortable, from having nothing held, from having let the water and the heat take everything that the day had put into the body and carry it away. They walked home through the cooling streets with muscles that had forgotten how to be tense. Their skin was warm from within. Even the evening air felt gentle now, almost pleasant against the surfaces of a body that had been so thoroughly warmed. They moved more slowly on the walk home than they had moved all day, not because they were exhausted, but because there was no urgency left in the body. No held energy looking for a way out, just the quiet, easy movement of a body that has been cared for. The streets they walked through were quieter now than they had been at dusk. The lamps in the windows were lit, a child's voice somewhere being called inside from wherever children go in the evenings. They were almost home. Their feet knew the way without needing to think about it. And when they arrived, when they came through the door into the small warm rooms that were theirs, they found that the house had been waiting for them with the patient kindness that familiar spaces always offer. The lamp was burning. The bed was there. The night was settling over the city like something very gentle and very large. And the body, finally, after everything it had done and carried and held through the long hours of the day, the body was ready to put it all down and sleep. Step outside with me for a moment. The streets of Rome after dark were a different country than the streets of Rome by day. They were not empty, not entirely, but the people who moved through them, and the pace at which they moved, and the sound the streets made under feet and wheels, all of this was transformed once the last light left the sky. The major streets of the city were lit in part by the lamps in windows and in doorways, and in the small street corner niches where household gods stood their eternal watch. This was not a system of public lighting in any organized modern sense. It was an accumulation of private flames, each one small, each one reaching only a short distance into the dark, but together creating a kind of amber constellation at street level that made the city navigable for those who knew it. And most people who were out at night did know it. The sounds of the night streets were different. By day, Rome was a city of voices and industry and constant motion. At night, individual sounds rose to the surface. Your own footsteps on the stone, the distant sound of water running in a fountain, the creak of a shutter, the particular sound a lamp makes in still air, which is almost no sound at all, just the faintest suggestion of a breath, a soft, wavering presence at the edge of hearing. Dogs. There were always dogs. The dogs of Rome moved through the night streets with a freedom and confidence that daylight never gave them. They knew the night belonged to them in some essential way. They patrolled with a quiet seriousness, these lean, clever city dogs, checking the bases of buildings, sniffing at doorways, occasionally stopping to lift their heads and taste the air for whatever information it contained. They were not alarming. They were simply present, part of the nighttime texture of the city. Something that told you if you were walking home late and feeling the faint uncertainty that darkness can bring, that you were not alone in the streets, that the city was still inhabited, still watched over, still breathing, even in the dark. The watchmen made their rounds. These were the vigiles, men whose job was to patrol the city through the night, watching for fire above all else. They moved in small groups, carrying their own lights, and the sound of them approaching, the particular sound of several men walking together at a measured pace, was a sound that most Romans would have found not frightening, but reassuring. Someone is watching. Someone is awake so that the rest of us can sleep. There is something very old in that reassurance, something that goes back to the first human settlements when a fire was kept burning through the night, not just for warmth, but because a fire meant a watcher, meant that someone had agreed for these hours to stay alert while the others rested. If you were out, walking after dark, perhaps returning from a dinner at a friend's house, perhaps taking a longer route home simply because the night was mild and the silence of the streets offered something the daytime never did. You might pass a group of vigiles and exchange a nod, nothing more. The night did not demand conversation. It offered instead something rarer, the chance to move through the familiar city in a state that the daylight hours never allowed, a a state of quiet attention, of noticing things that were always there but that the noise and crowd of day kept hidden. The particular way lamplight pooled on wet stones, the silhouette of an old tree that grew in a courtyard, visible through an open gate, the smell of the hills coming in on a breeze from the east, a smell of grass and earth and darkness that reminded you that the city, for all its stone and smoke and humanity, was still set down in the middle of the living world. These moments of nighttime walking, ordinary as they were, had a quality that the Romans themselves would have recognized as something close to peace. Not the peace of having nothing to worry about. Life always provides something to worry about. But the peace of having set the worries down temporarily, of having stepped outside of the story of your particular life for a little while and found yourself simply inside the larger, quieter story of the city at night. The streets curved and narrowed and opened again. Buildings rose on both sides, their upper stories dark, their lower windows showing the occasional dim glow of a lamp left burning. Somewhere above, between the roof lines, a few stars were visible in the black. Your feet found their way. Your breathing was easy. And the city folded around you like something ancient and gentle, the way that very old things fold around you when you let them, with a patience that asks nothing from you and offers everything. Let us go inside now. Let us step across the threshold and leave the night streets to the dogs and the watchmen and the ancient stars. Let us come inside where the lamp is burning low and the air is warm with the accumulated breath of the day, and find the place where a Roman lay down each night and gave themselves over to the darkness. The Roman bedroom was called the cubiculum. The word means, roughly, the small room. And most cubicular were exactly that, small, often dark, often just barely large enough to contain a bed and the basic furniture of a sleeping life. This smallness was not considered a hardship by most Romans. We live in an era that equates space with comfort, but the Romans measured bedroom comfort in other ways, in the quality of the mattress, in the warmth of the coverings, in whether the room kept out the sound from the street below. The mattress of a well-off Roman was filled with wool, good wool carded and cleaned and pressed into a thickness that provided real cushioning. Some mattresses were filled with feathers or the down from water birds, reserved for those with significant wealth. The simplest mattresses were filled with straw or reeds, which provided a rough support and a particular sound when you shifted your weight, a rustling whisper that most Romans who slept on such mattresses would never have noticed because they had heard it every night of their lives. But even the straw mattress, at the end of a long day, after the bath, after the meal, after the slow walk through the lamplit streets, was a remarkable thing, because it was yours. Because you knew its contours, you knew the slightly soft place in the middle, you knew which way the pillow settled when you lay on your side, you knew the exact smell of this particular sleeping place, a smell that was utterly specific to your life and your body and your history. The coverings were typically wool. Romans slept under blankets that had been woven by hand. The wool could be rough or smooth depending on the quality of the fleece and the skill of the weaver. Against the skin at night, a good wool blanket had a particular solidity that synthetic materials do not quite replicate. It was heavy enough to register, heavy enough that you felt covered in a physical, definite way. There is something very old in the feeling of a heavy blanket, something the body responds to before the mind has processed it. A weighted comfort that seems to say, you are enclosed, you are wrapped, nothing can reach you here. The walls of the cubiculum were sometimes painted. Even relatively modest Romans decorated their sleeping rooms because the Romans believed that beauty had practical value, that living among beautiful things made the mind calmer and the sleep sounder. The paintings were not always elaborate, sometimes just borders of simple geometric shapes or panels of solid warm colour, deep red or ochre yellow, or the particular blue-green of a calm sea. Sometimes small scenes, a garden, a bird, a mythological figure that meant something to the household. These were the last things a Roman saw before closing their eyes. Not a glowing screen, not headlines, just the soft painted walls in the last of the lamplight and the familiar ceiling above and the weight of the wool and the sound of the city grown very quiet outside the shuttered window. The wealthy slept in larger cubicula, of course. Some had beds of considerable luxury, with frames inlaid with ivory or tortoiseshell, with mattresses of feather and down, with hanging curtains to enclose the sleeping space entirely. But whether your bed was made of costly wood with ivory fittings, or of plain planks raised off the cold floor on simple legs, the act of lying down in it at the end of the day was the same. The body recognized the surface. The body settled. The tension that the day had gathered, which the bath had loosened, which the meal had softened further, which the walk home had soothed to almost nothing, released its last small holdings and went somewhere else. The shoulders, gone. The jaw, gone. The hands, which had gripped and carried and worked and gestured through all the hours since sunrise, opened slowly of their own will, the way hands open when they are finally allowed to be hands and not tools. And the breath, which had been doing its faithful work all day, moved more deeply now, more slowly, finding the pace it chose when no one was asking anything of it. The lamp on its small stand burned lower as the oil diminished. The shadows deepened at the corners of the room. The painted walls held their colours in the dimming light, the red and ochre and sea blue still present, but quieted now, no longer performing, just being. And in the warm, small darkness of the cubiculum, a Roman lay and felt the day dissolve. Dreams were not private in ancient Rome. This is perhaps the most striking difference between how Romans understood the sleeping mind and how we tend to understand it today. For us, a dream is an interior event, a product of our own neurology, our own memories and fears and desires, shuffled and replayed by a brain that never quite stops working. But for Romans, the boundary between sleep and the world beyond sleep was permeable in a way that we have largely closed off. Dreams arrived. That was the Roman understanding. They came from somewhere else, passed through some threshold in the night, and were received by the sleeping mind the way a messenger is received at a city gate. Sometimes the messenger was bearing good news, sometimes warning, sometimes the message was obscure, wrapped in imagery that needed interpretation, but the message always came from outside. It had a source, and that source was, in some way, larger than the individual dreamer. The gods appeared in dreams. This was not a metaphor for Romans. It was a genuine expectation. If you were concerned about an important decision, if you needed guidance about an illness or a journey or a business arrangement, you might go to sleep with an active intention of receiving a dream that would help you. You might make a small offering before sleep. You might visit a temple associated with a particular deity and sleep in the sacred precinct, a practice called incubation, specifically to invite a divine dream. The god Asclepius, the healer, was particularly known for appearing in healing dreams. People who were sick, or whose loved ones were sick, would travel to his great temple complexes and sleep there, hoping to receive in the night the instructions or the cure that the god might deliver. And many of them reported that they did, that they dreamed of a figure who spoke to them, who touched them, who told them what they needed to know. There were professional dream interpreters in Rome, men and women who made their living by hearing the dreams of others and offering explanations. There were even books of dream interpretation, compendiums of symbols and their meanings, so that if you dreamed of a specific animal or object or situation, you could look it up and find the traditional understanding of what such a dream had meant across centuries of recorded sleep. A dream of flying was generally positive. A dream of losing teeth was associated with loss. A dream of water could mean many things depending on whether the water was clear or turbid, flowing or still, whether you were in it or watching it. These were not personal inventions, they were collective inheritance. They were the accumulated sleep wisdom of a civilization, passed down through generations as a shared language for what happened to the human mind in the dark. But the Romans also dreamed ordinary dreams, of course, the same tangled, ordinary things that people have always dreamed. Dreams of work left unfinished, dreams of conversations that did not go as expected, dreams in which familiar faces appeared in unfamiliar places and said things that made perfect sense while you were asleep and complete nonsense upon waking. Dreams of food, dreams of weather, dreams of long roads that went nowhere in particular but felt urgently important to travel. The dreaming mind has always been this way, mixing the cosmic with the mundane. There was a kind of dream the Romans called the somnium, which was an ordinary dream whose meaning, if it had one, was indirect and symbolic. There was the visio, a dream in which you saw something that would actually come to pass. There was the oraculum, a dream in which a respected figure, a parent, a teacher, a deity, appeared and spoke directly, delivering counsel as clearly as any waking conversation. And there was the visum, a dream that occurred in the borderland between waking and sleep, in that strange threshold state where you are not quite asleep and not quite awake, and the mind produces images and voices and half-formed narratives that feel entirely real for the fraction of a second before consciousness asserts itself and they dissolve. You have been in that borderland. You know what it feels like. The way the mind begins to produce images without being asked. The way a face appears, or a landscape, or a word said in someone's voice, clear and present, and then instantly gone. The way you follow a thread of thought that slowly, without your noticing, transforms into something else entirely. Romans fell into that borderland every night, as you are falling into it now. Their last waking thoughts drifted. The lamp grew lower. The painted walls faded into darkness. And the mind, freed from the requirements of the waking day, began to do what the mind always does when given space and darkness and time. It opened. Not toward anything frightening, not toward anything that required effort or attention, but toward the gentle, unmapped territory that lies just beyond the edge of ordinary awareness. The territory where the gods walk in the dark, or where the neurons fire in patterns that feel from the inside exactly like gods walking in the dark. The territory where the day's concerns become something else, something looser and stranger and somehow easier to carry. The territory of sleep. You are very close to it now. Can you feel the edges of it? The way your thoughts, if you have any, are becoming less precise, less sequential. The way one thing is beginning to blur softly into another without the sharp joins of waking logic. That is the borderland. The Romans knew it. They lay in their warm beds in their small painted rooms and felt the same soft dissolution you are feeling right now. And they were not afraid of it. They called it rest. They called it the gift of the dark hours. They welcomed it the way you welcome anything that has come faithfully every night of your life and has never yet failed you. Open your eyes just for a moment. Not the eyes in your head. Those can stay closed. Open the eyes that exist behind the eyes, the ones that see without needing light. And look up. Imagine the sky above ancient Rome on a clear night. There is no word in our language, really, for what this sky would have looked like to a person standing in the streets of that city 2,000 years ago. We have words for impressive skies, for beautiful skies, for overwhelming skies. But none of these words quite captures the experience of looking up from an ancient city and seeing a sky that has not been washed out, dimmed, diluted, or flattened by the accumulated glow of a civilization that never fully turns off its lights, the Milky Way. Modern people who have traveled to truly dark places, to remote mountains or deserts or sea crossings far from any coast, sometimes describe their first real sight of the Milky Way as one of the most profound experiences of their lives. Not because it is more dramatic than they expected, though it is, but because it feels more personal, more intimate, as if the sky has always been trying to say something that the lights of the modern world have been drowning out, and in the darkness of a remote place you can finally, for the first time, actually hear it. Romans heard it every night. Every clear night above the city, that river of light was visible, not as a faint smear at the edge of perception, but as a presence, a structure, a luminous road across the darkness that had enough detail, enough depth, enough internal variation that you could look at it for a long time and keep finding new things to see. The Romans had a name for it. They called it the Via Lactea, the Milky Way. And unlike us, for whom this is primarily a term from astronomy class, for Romans the phrase corresponded to a direct nightly experience. They looked up and they saw the milk. They saw the path. They felt, in whatever way ancient people felt things that they could not fully explain, that this road of light meant something. Connected. Something. Reached somewhere that the earthly roads they walked every day did not reach. There were planets too, visible to the naked eye, distinguishable from stars by their steadiness. Stars twinkle, planets do not. They burn with a fixed, calm light that the Romans noticed and tracked and gave names to. 5 planets were known to them, each associated with a deity, each moving through the fixed pattern of the stars on its own schedule. There were the constellations, not the scientific designations we use today, but the stories, the figures drawn in starlight that the Romans had inherited from even older civilizations and had made their own. Orion the hunter, rising in winter evenings with his distinctive belt of 3 stars. The Scorpion, ancient enemy of Orion, which rises on the opposite side of the sky when Orion sets, as if the two are still keeping their eternal, wary distance. The Great Bear, turning slowly around the northern pole star. Lying on a flat roof in summer, or standing in an open courtyard, or simply pausing on the way home to lean against a wall and tip your head back, a Roman could spend an hour watching the stars move and feel the actual rotation of the earth. This is not a metaphor. The stars move. The whole sky turns slowly and steadily from east to west, at a rate just slow enough that you cannot quite perceive it from moment to moment, but just fast enough that if you pick a star and look at it again an hour later, it has moved unmistakably. The earth is turning. You are on the earth. And if you look up long enough on a dark night, you can feel it. Romans felt it. The sky above them was not background. It was not wallpaper. It was a living document written in light, changing by the hour and by the season, telling the same stories it had always told, in the same patient, celestial language. And lying on their wool mattresses in their small rooms, through the gaps in shutters or through doorways left open to catch the summer breeze, Romans saw the stars pass across their fields of vision and knew, without needing to be told, that the night was alive. That the darkness was not empty. That the universe, whatever it was and wherever it went, continued to exist while they slept. There was something enormously comforting in this. To know that the sky would keep its watch. To know that the stars would still be there in the morning. To know that you could close your eyes and let the world continue without you for a few hours, and that when you opened them again, the same lights would be burning above, the same patient constellations holding their ancient positions. Look up now with those inner eyes. See the stars above ancient Rome. The Milky Way crossing the darkness like a road made of light. The planets burning steady. Orion rising in the east. Everything turning. Everything continuing, everything vast and quiet and entirely unconcerned with whether you are asleep or awake. You can let go now. The sky will hold things while you rest. There is a city that time stopped mid-breath. Pompeii. Not the famous Pompeii of catastrophe, not the frozen moment of the mountain. Tonight, we are visiting Pompeii on an ordinary evening, on a night just like any of the thousands of nights that this prosperous, lively, intensely human city experienced in its long, ordinary life. It is late afternoon and the streets of Pompeii are doing what streets in a Roman city do at this hour. They are beginning the evening transition. The fuller's workshop on the corner is closing. The bread shop is sold down to its last few loaves, and the baker's wife is sweeping the entrance with a worn broom, raising a small cloud of flour dust that catches the horizontal light and turns it briefly golden. The street itself is paved with large irregular stones, worn smooth by centuries of feet and cartwheels. Stepping stones cross at intervals, raised blocks that allow pedestrians to cross without putting their feet in the water. Children, whose relationship to stepping stones is identical in every civilization and every era, are using them to play a jumping game, leaping from stone to stone with concentrated delight. A dog sleeps in a doorway. The sound of someone playing a stringed instrument comes from somewhere in an upper story, a slow, wandering melody that is not quite a song, just someone following their fingers through the evening, not performing, just playing the way you might hum to yourself while doing something with your hands. By the fountain at the corner, two women are filling jugs and talking. Their conversation has the comfortable pace of people who talk to each other every day and are not in any hurry to reach a conclusion. One of them laughs suddenly at something the other has said. The laugh echoes briefly off the stone walls and then fades. An hour passes. The sun is gone now, dropped behind the hills to the west. The streets have not gone dark because the lamps are lit in the windows and doorways, but the quality of the light has changed completely. The city is not less alive, it is differently alive. The wine shop near the Forum is lit from within. Inside, a small group of men are having a conversation that has clearly been going on for some time. Someone is making a point with considerable emphasis. Someone else is disagreeing with the quiet certainty of a person who has been disagreeing with this particular person for so long that it has become a comfortable habit. In a garden behind a house not far from the main street, a woman is picking the last of the evening herbs. Rosemary, a few sprigs of something that will go into the evening meal. The garden is small, but has been tended with care. A small fountain in the corner, just a trickle of water into a stone basin, makes a sound that is barely audible, but somehow fills the garden with a sense of life. The walls around the garden are painted with garden scenes, birds and plants, and the suggestion of a landscape beyond, so that the actual small garden seems, at certain moments, to extend into a larger, imaginary one. She goes inside and the garden is left to its small sounds. The water, a night bird somewhere, the distant street. In the bathhouse, the last bathers of the evening are finishing their rituals. The fires under the hypocaust have been burning since midday, and the walls and floors still hold their heat. Two boys are splashing in the cold plunge pool with the high-pitched enthusiasm of children who have been told it is almost time to go, but have not yet accepted this fact. Their laughter bounces off the vaulted ceiling and multiplies. By the time they leave, the street outside is fully night. The stepping stones stand silver in the moonlight. The dogs have claimed the street, moving through it with the unhurried authority of creatures who know that this hour belongs to them. In the houses and apartments behind the painted walls and the shuttered windows, Pompeii is settling into sleep. A lamp is trimmed lower. A child is told for the third time that it is time to close her eyes. A man lies on his mattress and listens to the last sounds of the street and finds in these sounds not disturbance but company, the sounds of a city that is still there, still alive, still holding him within it as he drifts. This is an ordinary night in Pompeii. Nothing unusual will happen. Tomorrow will arrive in the usual way, the sun rising over the hills to the east, the baker returning to his ovens, the stepping stone children resuming their game, the dog in the doorway relocating to a patch of morning sun. The city will continue. The mountain above, visible from many streets and rooftops, is simply a mountain. It has been there their whole lives. It will be there tomorrow. Tonight, it is simply a dark shape against the stars. Tonight, there is only the lamplit city and the dreaming streets and the millions of small human lives being lived within the old stones. Sleep Pompeii. The night is quiet. Everything is as it should be. The water runs in the fountain. The stars turn overhead. And in all the small rooms of this city, behind all the shuttered windows and the painted walls, people are breathing slowly, sleeping deeply, carried on the dark current of the ordinary night. Nothing is required of them now. Nothing is required of you. Sleep was not seamless for the Romans. It was not supposed to be. And there is something quietly reassuring in this for those of us who sometimes lie awake in the middle of the night, wondering why we are awake, wondering if something is wrong with us, wondering why the darkness has opened its eyes when we wanted them closed. Nothing was wrong with the Romans when they woke at the second or third hour of the night. It was simply how sleep worked, how it had always worked before the modern idea that a night's sleep should be one unbroken block of unconsciousness became the standard against which every sleeper measured themselves. Many Romans slept in two segments. The first sleep, which began at dusk or shortly after and lasted several hours. Then a waking period of perhaps an hour or two, when the body had risen naturally to a lighter state, when the mind was quiet but alert. And then the second sleep, which would last until near dawn. The Romans had words for these. The first sleep, the second sleep. A natural rhythm that the body knew without being taught. What woke them? Sometimes nothing. Sometimes the transition between sleep states simply lifted them gently to the surface of awareness, the way a wave lifts a floating thing, without urgency, without distress. They would lie in the familiar dark, listening to the familiar sounds, and the sounds would be there to listen to. Dogs. The dogs of Rome were active at night and communicated across considerable distances. A dog barking in one neighborhood might set off another in the next, and another after that, a chain of sound rippling across the sleeping city. For a Roman lying half awake in the middle of the night, this sound was background. It had always been there. The absence of it would have been more notable than its presence. Weather. Rome in summer could be very still and very hot, and a night wind coming off the hills was not just noticeable but welcomed. The sound of wind through the shutters, a soft, irregular percussion, was often the companion of that middle of the night waking. Sometimes rain arrived, and Rome loved its rain the way all Mediterranean cities love rain, with a grateful relief. The sound of rain on Roman rooftops was exactly what you imagine. A rising, deepening white noise that covered everything else, that filled the spaces between thoughts, that said, "There is nothing for you to do about this. Simply lie here and listen." Neighbors. The insular buildings were not soundproofed. People in the apartment above or the wall across the courtyard made their presence known through the ordinary sounds of living. These sounds were not pleasant in themselves, but they were familiar. They belonged to the texture of the life you were living. They placed you inside a human community, even at the deepest hours of the night. reminded you that you were not alone in the darkness, that on every side of your small room there were other people lying in their own warm rooms, also somewhere between sleeping and waking, also listening. And in that middle of the night stillness, the Romans would have done what people in that quiet waking state have always done. They thought. Not with the urgent, jagged thinking of daytime worry, with a slower, looser kind of thinking that the relaxed body and the late hour produce naturally, thoughts that arrived without being summoned and departed without needing to be resolved. Plans for tomorrow held lightly. Something someone had said during the day, noticed now with the soft attention that the daytime had not had time for. A face, a place, a fragment of yesterday's walk. And then, after some time, the thinking would soften. The thoughts would become less distinct. The sounds from the street would recede, not because they had stopped, but because attention was no longer following them. The body, which had risen slightly into wakefulness, would begin its return. Slowly, like a stone sinking in still water. The second sleep would come, deeper than the first often, more dreamful, more complete. The body, having rested, having risen to the surface and floated for a while, was ready now to go under again, more willingly, more entirely. And the dogs would still be barking, and the rain would still be falling or not falling, and the stars above the rooftops would still be turning in their ancient, patient circles. And the Roman who had briefly been awake would be asleep again before they knew it, carried down by the gentle current of the second sleep, going somewhere very deep and very quiet, where even the dogs could not follow. There is a kind of tiredness that the Romans knew, and that most modern people have almost forgotten. Not the tiredness of being stressed, not the tiredness of having stared at a screen for 12 hours and overstimulated every sense while barely moving your body. Not the nervous exhaustion that comes from the particular quality of modern busyness. The tiredness the Romans knew was the tiredness of the body, of legs that had walked on hard stone for most of the day, of arms that had lifted and carried and pulled and pushed, of a back that had bent over work for hours, of hands that had gripped and released and gripped again. Physical tiredness has a quality that is different from mental tiredness in a very important way. When the body is genuinely tired from physical use, sleep does not have to be pursued. It does not have to be invited, cajoled, negotiated with. It arrives of its own accord with the quiet authority of something that belongs there, that was always going to arrive at this hour, that the body has been building toward since it rose in the morning. The Romans rose with the sun, or before it. Their days were structured around daylight in a way that ours have almost entirely ceased to be. The rhythm of Roman daily life was not an arbitrary schedule imposed from outside. It was the rhythm of the available light, which is the rhythm of the earth turning, which is the rhythm that the human body was built for, over hundreds of thousands of years before anyone thought to push that rhythm aside. Work happened in the morning when the light was good and the air was cool. The middle of the day slowed. The afternoon picked up again as the heat of midday passed, and then the sun moved toward the hills, and the city began its long, slow transition toward evening, and no one had to announce that the working day was ending, because the light itself announced it. The body lived in a world that matched its expectations. Dawn, wake. Dusk, begin to rest. Dark, sleep. This alignment between the external world and the internal body is something that most people alive today have never fully experienced as a sustained way of life. We live in a world where light is available whenever we want it. We work when the body wants to rest. We expose ourselves to bright screens at the hour when the body is expecting darkness. And then, when sleep does not come naturally and easily, we wonder why. The Romans did not have this problem, not in the same way. When darkness came, it came completely. The oil lamps provided enough light to eat by, to talk by, to find your way across a room, but they did not provide enough light to keep the eyes and the brain in the state of high alertness that bright light produces. They flickered softly. They created pools of warmth rather than floods of illumination. They told the eyes gently that the bright part of the day was over. And the eyes, receiving that information, told the brain, and the brain, receiving that information, began the cascade of chemical changes that it has been beginning at this time of day for as long as there have been brains. The body wants to do this. The body has always wanted to do this. It is only the light that gets in the way. The Romans also moved, all day, every day. Most Romans walked everywhere. The city did not have public transportation in the sense we mean, and a city like Rome, with its hills and its dense neighborhoods and its distances between the home and the market and the bathhouse and the workshop, meant that most working Romans walked several miles on most days without particularly thinking about it. This movement is what the body was built for. The human body is not designed to be still. It is designed to move across a landscape, to use its muscles for real physical work, to expend genuine energy in the pursuit of the day's necessities. And when that movement and that energy expenditure happen, something very specific happens to the quality of sleep that follows. It deepens, not in a self-conscious, curated way, not because the person has carefully followed a protocol, but naturally, inevitably, because the body has been used in the way bodies are meant to be used, and when the time for rest comes, the body is genuinely ready for it. The Romans were not wiser sleepers than we are. They did not understand sleep better than we do. But they lived in a world where their bodies and the natural rhythms of light and darkness and movement were still largely in alignment, and that alignment produced, as its natural consequence, sleep that came when the body needed it. Not because they tried, because they lived. And there is something in that fact that is worth holding for a moment. It is trying to rest. It is trying, with every mechanism available to it, to find the deep restorative darkness that it needs. It was trying in ancient Rome. It is trying in you right now. And if you let it, just for these few hours, just for tonight, it will find what it is looking for. You do not have to do anything. You just have to stop preventing it. The body knows the way. It has always known the way. Let it go. The lamps are growing dim. All over the city, in every apartment and house and rented room, the oil in the small clay lamps is burning lower. The flames, which were steady and warm earlier in the evening, are now wavering slightly, reaching a little less far into the darkness, content with their smaller circle of light. The city outside has grown very quiet. Not silent, it is never entirely silent, but the sounds have changed. They have become few and spaced and soft. The occasional dog, the distant sound of a wheel on stone, the water in the fountain which has been speaking all evening continues its patient murmur. These sounds are not intrusive. They are company. They say, the world continues. You are inside it, and you do not have to do anything about it tonight. Breathe in and let it go. Feel the weight of yourself against the surface beneath you, the pressure of the mattress or the pillow, the exact temperature of the air on the parts of your face that are uncovered. These sensations are simply information. You do not need to respond to them. They are just the body reporting on its situation, and its situation is comfortable and warm and still. Imagine the streets outside, empty now, or nearly. The stepping stones across the street pale in the moonlight. The fountain at the corner, its basin full, its stream running steady, catching the light in small silver movements. The painted facade of the building across the way, its colours invisible in the dark, but present beneath the darkness, waiting patiently for morning to reveal them again. The cat that sits on the rooftop has been there for an hour, watching something in the sky that you cannot see. Perhaps the stars, perhaps simply nothing. Cats in all eras have always known how to simply be present without requiring meaning from their presence. The stars themselves. They are there above the rooftops of the city, all of them, all the ancient named ones moving in their slow circle. Orion is somewhere above the western hills. The Great Bear has turned to face a new part of the sky. The Milky Way, that river of light, stretches across the darkness from one horizon to the other. None of this requires anything from you. It was happening before you were born. It will be happening long after everyone alive has gone to sleep for good. The stars are simply there, burning their patient ancient fires indifferent and beautiful, keeping whatever vigil stars keep, while everything below them breathes. You can feel, if you pay attention, the slowing of your thoughts. Not all at once, in small increments. The thoughts that were present are becoming less distinct, less sequential. The gap between one thought and the next is widening slightly, a breath of empty space appearing between them, the way space appears between words when someone speaks more slowly. This is not something to worry about. This is the beginning of what you came here for. Let the thoughts become quieter. They are not important right now. Whatever they are, they will still be there tomorrow if you need them. They do not have to be solved or sorted or held tonight. They can be set down here in the warm dark, the way you would set down something you had been carrying, without ceremony, without special attention, just setting it down because you do not need to carry it anymore. The painted walls of the room are invisible now. The ceiling above is a soft darkness. The wool blanket is warm and heavy and present. The lamp in the corner is down to its last small flame, trembling in the stillness of the room, too small now to illuminate anything but itself, a bright point in the darkness, like a star that has come indoors. Breathe In and out. Your body is very still, not because you are holding it still, because it has found its stillness on its own, the way water finds its level, the way a pendulum comes to rest. The body knows how to be still. It has always known. You simply had to stop moving long enough to let it remember. Outside, the night has entered its deepest hours. The city is breathing. Not a metaphor, a city at night has a rhythm that is almost like breathing. The slight movement of air through the streets, in and out, in and out. The pulse of the watchmen's lamps as they make their rounds. The occasional sound, like a heartbeat, of something distant and unremarkable. The night is alive. You are inside it. You are part of it. The ancient Romans who slept in rooms like this one, under ceilings like this one, with the same stars turning above the same rooftops, they too felt this. This particular quality of the very late night, when the effort of the day has completely dissolved, when the body has been fed and bathed and rested, when the mind has run down through all its concerns and found its way to the bottom of them, where there are no more concerns, only the fact of being here, in the dark, breathing. They called the night Nox. They thought of it as a goddess, great and ancient and enveloping, not frightening, necessary, the darkness that restored what the light consumed, the quiet that gave meaning to the noise, the rest without which no work could be done, no day could begin, no life could continue. Nox. She is here now. She is the darkness in this room. She is the silence between sounds. She is the slowing of your breath. She does not ask anything of you. She only offers. Let the hands go limp. They have done their work. They held what they needed to hold. They released what needed to be released. Now they can simply lie where they are, open or closed. It does not matter. Empty, resting, without task or intention. Let the feet go soft. The feet that carried you through the day, that know every crack and curve of the floors you walk, that have been bearing your weight faithfully since the morning. Let them go. Let them be simply warm shapes at the ends of your legs, needing nothing, doing nothing, allowed to simply be. The lamp has gone out. In the room, in the small painted room, the last light is gone and the darkness is complete. And the darkness is gentle and the darkness is full of the soft sounds of the sleeping city and the turning stars and the patient fountain and the dogs who have finally fallen silent. It is the third hour of the night. Deep in the city, someone is dreaming of a garden. Someone is dreaming of water, clear and warm, a pool they can float in without effort. Someone is dreaming of a road that goes through hills they recognize, hills they have walked before, that lead somewhere familiar and safe. And perhaps, on the edge of sleep, before the dream begins, there is a moment, a brief, clear moment, when the mind is neither here nor there, when the day is fully behind and the sleep is fully ahead, and there is nothing between them but this, the sound of your own breathing, the weight of of the blanket, the dark, the still, the moment between. The Romans knew this moment. Every person who has ever lived has known this moment. It belongs to no civilization and all civilizations. It belongs to no era. It belongs to the body and the dark and the turning earth and the stars that were there before any of us and will be thereafter. You are in it now, in this same moment. The same darkness that covered ancient Rome is covering you. The same stars that turned above those old rooftops are turning above yours. The same deep animal part of you that knew 10,000 years before Rome was built, that dark means safe and rest means morning and morning means continuation. That same ancient knowing is here. Settle. Go down. Go all the way down into the warm dark. The lamp is out. The city is asleep. The stars are keeping watch. And you. You have done enough today. You have been enough today. Tomorrow will come when it comes, and you will be ready for it. But that is tomorrow. This is now. This is the quiet. This is the dark. This is the place where 2,000 years dissolve, and there is only a person lying still, and the night holding them, and the stars above turning slowly, slowly, slowly in the ancient sky. Sleep now. Sleep like a Roman. The city is quiet. The lamp is out. And the night will carry you gently to the morning. Good night. But that is still some hours away. The morning has not come yet. And yet, let us imagine it for a moment. Let us imagine the morning the way you imagine the far shore of a river you are floating toward, not urgently, not even consciously, but drifting in its direction on a current that has always known where it was going. The Roman morning began before colour, before the sky turned from black to blue to the first pale suggestion of gold. The city began to stir, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the way that living things always stir toward light, with a kind of cellular inevitability that requires no decision and no alarm. The bakers were first. They had been first for so long that being first was simply what they were. The bread ovens of Rome were wood-fired, and by law many could not be operated during the heat of the day, so the bakers worked the deep hours of the night and the early morning, beginning their fires while the rest of the city still slept, loading their ovens while the stars were still visible above the rooftops. The smell of bread baking is one of the oldest signals in the world. It travels far, it moves through walls and around corners and under doors with a patience and a persistence that no other smell quite matches. And in the pre-dawn streets of Rome, when almost everything else was still and dark and quiet, the smell of the bread ovens beginning their morning work was a kind of announcement, not an alarm, not a summons, just a gentle notification from the neighborhood. Something warm is coming. Something good is on its way. The fountains had been running all night as they always did. Rome's water never stopped. It flowed from the hills through the aqueducts and through the pipes and into the basins day and night, without interruption, a constant presence so fundamental to the city's life that Romans barely registered it consciously, the way you do not consciously register your own heartbeat. But in the morning, in the quiet that preceded the first stirrings of the working day, the fountains were more audible, more present. The sound of the water ran through the empty streets like a conversation that had never stopped, like someone who had simply kept talking through the night and was still talking now, patient and unhurried, waiting for the rest of the world to wake up and join in. The light came slowly. First, just a thinning of the darkness in the east, a quality of less dark rather than any true light, a suggestion that somewhere beyond the hills the process had begun, that the sun, which had set with such ceremony the evening before, was making its way back. Then a grey that was almost blue. Then a blue that was almost lavender. Then the first true gold, arriving so gradually that you could not have said at what precise moment darkness ended and morning began, only that at some point the rooftops were visible against the sky, and then the upper stories of the buildings, and then the street itself, revealing itself stone by stone, as if it had been painted there overnight. Birds. The birds of Rome woke with the light, as birds always do, and their morning chorus was not the quiet murmur of night sounds, but something more insistent, more varied, a sound that grew as the light grew, as if the two were connected, as if the birds were calling the sun up with their singing and the sun was responding. The first people appeared in the streets. Workers heading to the docks while the light was still low and cool. A woman with an empty jug going to the fountain. A boy running somewhere with the urgency of a message that cannot wait. A cat returning from wherever cats go in the night, picking its way across the stepping stones with the satisfied expression of a creature that has made excellent use of the dark hours. The city was waking. Not the city you walked through last night. That city belonged to lamplight and quiet and the soft sounds of the sleeping world. This was a different city, the same stones and walls and fountains, but animated now by a completely different quality of aliveness, the aliveness of beginning, of possibility, of a day that has not yet made any demands and still contains everything. In the small rooms and apartments, people were opening their eyes. The light coming through the gaps in the shutters was thin and pale but real. Real morning light made of actual sun, carrying in it the particular quality that morning light has always had, which is the quality of a world that has been restored overnight to something close to its original condition, cleaned of yesterday's dust and noise and weight, offered back to you fresh. They lay for a moment, these Romans, in the last warmth of their wool blankets, in the last quiet before the day began to make its requests. They heard the bread. They heard the fountains. They heard the birds beginning their ancient conversation with the returning sun. And they knew, without needing to think about it, that they had slept. That the night had done its work. That they were, in some fundamental way that goes deeper than simply feeling rested, returned to themselves. But that morning is still ahead of you now. It is waiting patiently, as it always does, on the other side of sleep. You do not need to go toward it. It will come to you. For now, there is only the dark and the quiet and the long, easy drift toward the morning that is coming. Not all Romans slept in the city. Beyond the walls of Rome, beyond the suburban press of buildings and noise and population that surrounded the great city for miles in every direction, there was another world entirely. A world of estates and farms and country houses that sat in the landscape with a different kind of quietness than the city ever offered. A quietness that was not simply the absence of noise, but the presence of something older and deeper. The quietness of land that has been land for a very long time and intends to continue being land long after all the people who walk across it are gone. The Roman villa. Imagine arriving at one as the evening comes on. You have travelled through the afternoon, perhaps along one of the great roads that radiated outward from the city like the spokes of an enormous wheel, roads so straight and so well made that they seemed almost to impose their own calm on whoever walked or rode along them. The road has carried you out of the noise of the city, through the busy suburban territory of workshops and small farms and way stations, and eventually into a landscape that breathes differently. Fields. Vineyards, their rows of vines running across hillsides, with a geometry that is somehow both mathematical and deeply natural. Olive groves, the trees old and twisted, their silver-green leaves catching the late afternoon light and turning it into something that flickers at the edge of perception. Pastures, where animals stand in the evening shadows, patient and still, already beginning their own slow withdrawal from the day. And then the villa itself, set back from the road, approached through a path lined with cypress trees, those tall, dark exclamation marks of the Mediterranean landscape, which the Romans planted at the entrances to their important places, because the cypress tree is serious and permanent and says, without words, this place matters. This place has been here a long time. The house is built around a central courtyard, as most Roman buildings of consequence were. The courtyard contains a garden, and the garden contains, at its centre, a small pool or fountain, and the sound of that water is the first thing you hear when you step inside from the road. It is a sound that says, you have arrived. The outside world stays outside. As evening comes on, the household begins the business of closing itself for the night. This is a more elaborate process in a villa than in a city apartment, because a villa is a larger organism. The servants, whose work has filled the daylight hours with an enormous range of tasks, begin the final circuits of the evening. Lamps are lit and carried to the rooms where they are needed. The animals in the outbuildings are settled for the night, the last feeding done, the doors secured. The kitchen fire, which has been going since early morning, is banked down to coals that will hold until morning. The garden gate is closed. There is something deeply satisfying about watching a large, complex household close itself down for the night. It has the quality of a great machine coming gently to rest, each part slowing in sequence, the whole system reducing itself from its daytime complexity to the simple condition of rest. The countryside outside the villa at night was a completely different experience from the city at night. Where the city offered the comfort of density of human sounds pressing close on all sides, the countryside offered something almost opposite. an enormous, breathing darkness that extended in all directions without interruption. The hills were out there, invisible in the dark but present, their weight felt rather than seen. The fields were out there, the vines and the olive trees standing in the darkness, with the patient rootedness of things that do not need to be anywhere other than where they are. And the sounds. The sounds of a Roman countryside at night were a world away from the sounds of the city. No carts, no dogs in the streets, no watchman's footsteps. Instead, crickets. The crickets of a Mediterranean summer night are not background noise. They are the night itself, given voice. They fill the air from ground level to the tops of the trees with a continuous, rhythmic, slightly hypnotic sound that is so present, so complete, that after a little while it becomes indistinguishable from silence. It is the sound that silence sounds like in the countryside in summer. And between the pulses of the crickets, other sounds. A distant animal far across the fields. The sound carries in the night air with a clarity that daytime sounds never achieve. The call of something nocturnal and unhurried, making its way through the landscape with the confidence of a creature that has no reason to hurry. An owl, perhaps, somewhere in the old olive grove. The sound of the fountain in the courtyard garden, clearer now than it was in the bustle of the day, its small voice rising in the stillness with something almost like authority. The wind in the cypress trees at the entrance, a sound like breathing, slow and regular, the trees moving slightly in a breeze that is too gentle to feel on the skin, but audible in the needles. In the sleeping rooms of the villa, the beds were wider than those of city apartments, and the mattresses softer, and the coverings finer. The windows, in the summer, might be left open to the night air, which in the countryside was a completely different thing from city air. It had been over fields and hills rather than over streets and markets. It carried the smell of grass and earth, and the particular night freshness of the Mediterranean countryside, a smell that had no city equivalent, and that most city dwellers, experiencing it for the first time after a long period in Rome, found so unexpectedly affecting that it was almost unsettling. As if some part of them had been waiting for it. As if the body knew, without being told, that this was what air was supposed to smell like. Lying in a villa bedroom on a summer night, the window open to the darkness and the countryside sounds, was an experience that Romans of the wealthy class wrote about with a consistency that suggests something genuinely powerful. The absence of the city's noise, the presence of the night air, the unbroken darkness of a countryside sky, the sounds of the crickets and the distant animals, all of this combined into a quality of sleep that the city, for all its conveniences, could not quite provide. A deeper sleep. A sleep without the half-awareness that urban noise produces even in seasoned city dwellers, that slightly elevated background alertness that the sleeping city brain maintains, because experience has taught it that the city sometimes requires attention, even in the night. In the country, the brain could let that alertness go entirely. Because the crickets were not a threat, because the owl was not a threat, because the wind in the cypress trees was simply the wind, ancient and familiar and entirely benign. The brain, receiving these sounds, receiving this air, feeling this darkness, made a calculation that it had been making for hundreds of thousands of years. Safe. Here it is safe. And in the certainty of that safety, it let everything go. The villa settled into its nighttime stillness. The fountain continued its conversation with the dark garden. The crickets filled the night, from one edge of the world to the other. The cypress trees breathed at the gate, and in the rooms of the house behind the open windows, the sleeping breath of the household rose and fell, as steady and as certain as the turning of the stars above the dark Italian hills. Rome was a city of extraordinary contrasts, and nowhere were those contrasts more visible or more invisible than in the night. Because the night, whatever else it was the great equalizer. The wealthy man in his fine villa and the worker in his rented room above the street both needed the same thing when the lamps went out. Both needed the darkness, both needed the quiet, both needed the particular restoration that only sleep could provide. And sleep, when it came to both of them in the same way, passing through the same gate in the mind, arriving in the same borderland, delivering the same deep unconsciousness, regardless of whether the mattress beneath was filled with finest feathers or roughest straw. And yet the path to that sleep was very different. Let us think about the Roman who did not have much. The worker, the freedman, the craftsman of modest means, who rented a room or two in one of the great apartment blocks that crowded the neighborhoods of the city. The insular could rise 5, 6, 7 stories, and the higher you went, the cheaper the rent and the harder the conditions. The upper floors were farther from the ground, which made them colder in winter, and farther from the water supply, which meant carrying water up many flights of stairs. The upper floors were also the most vulnerable to the fires that were a constant danger in a city of oil lamps and wooden construction. But they were home. The room might be small enough that the bed, if there was a proper bed, took up most of the floor space. A lamp on a shelf, a few personal items on a hook or in a chest, a view from the window, if the window faced the right direction, of the rooftops of the city, and a slice of sky. The sounds from the street below rose clearly to these upper rooms. The city at night was never entirely quiet, and from a high window it could seem that the entire nocturnal life of the neighborhood was being conducted specifically below you. Voices, carts, which were permitted on many streets only at night and so made their deliveries through the dark hours with a rumbling persistence. Occasionally an argument or music from a tavern that had no intention of closing early. The insular sleeper learned to sleep through these sounds the way you learn to sleep through anything that appears with sufficient regularity. They became texture rather than interruption. The fabric of the night, known and unremarkable, woven into the background of sleep, the way the sound of your own breathing is woven in, present but not requiring attention. The straw mattress, by the end of a long working day, felt like enough. The rough wool blanket pulled close in the chill of the upper floor felt like enough. The small lamp, burned down and gutted out, left the room in a darkness that was complete, and, in its completeness, a kind of mercy. Now, let us think about the wealthy Roman. The senator, the successful merchant, the landowner with his townhouse in one of the better neighborhoods, or his villa in the hills above the city. This person had access to a quality of sleep environment that the insular worker could not have imagined. The cubiculum of a wealthy Roman house was designed with care. The room was positioned to minimize street noise. The walls were thick, the floor might be mosaic, cool underfoot in summer, and the walls were painted with scenes chosen for their calming effect. Gardens, water, sky, mythological figures associated with peace and rest. The shutters fit well and closed out not only light but sound. The bed itself was a piece of furniture of considerable craft, a frame of carved wood, sometimes inlaid with ivory or other precious materials. A mattress of wool or down so refined that lying on it was a different physical experience from lying on a working person's pallet, a softness that seemed to receive the body rather than simply support it. Multiple coverings of fine wool or linen adjusted for the season. Curtains around the bed that could be drawn to create an enclosed space within the room, a room within a room, a small, private darkness. A servant might be nearby, available if needed through the night. The household would have been quieted before the master retired. The garden outside, if there was one, would be still and fragrant in the night air. And yet, the wealthy Roman was not necessarily a better sleeper than the insular worker. The sources we have from Roman writers on the subject of sleep suggest, with a consistency that is almost amusing, that wealth and the quality of sleep do not map onto each other as neatly as one might expect. The wealthy Roman had more worries in many cases, more to lose, more to manage, more obligations that pressed on the mind even in the dark hours. The philosopher Seneca, who had access to every comfort Rome could offer, wrote about his difficulty sleeping with a candor that would not be out of place in a modern conversation about insomnia. The mind, he observed, does not stop being the mind simply because the body is in a comfortable bed. The thoughts that the day produces do not vanish when the lamp goes out. They must be addressed or released or somehow set aside, and neither a fine mattress nor a quiet room can do that work for you. That work is interior. That work belongs to whoever is doing the sleeping, regardless of their station. Which means that in some essential way, the wealthy Roman and the insular worker were doing the same thing when they lay down in the dark. Releasing the day, setting down the weight of their particular life with its particular concerns and particular history, finding in the darkness that is the same for everyone the particular stillness that the body has been building toward since sunrise. One on feathers, one on straw. Both eventually in the same place. The same darkness. The same breath. The same slow, certain dissolution of everything that the day had made them carry. You are in that same place now. It does not matter what your day contained. It does not matter what the world outside your window sounds like. The darkness is here. The stillness is here. And sleep, which has never once in the history of the world failed to come to those who wait for it quietly, is coming for you too. As it came for the senator in his fine house on the Aventine, as it came for the freedman in his rented room above the noisy street, as it has come for every human being who has ever lived long enough to lie down in the dark and breathe. It is coming. Let it come. There is an hour that belongs to no part of the day. It comes before the birds, before the bakers' fires have sent their smell into the streets, before the sky has shown any colour at all, or even the suggestion of colour, or even the memory of what colour is. This hour is the deepest part of the night. Not the early part, when the lamps are still burning and the last wine shops are still open and the city is making its gradual transition from day to night. Not the middle part, when even the dogs have grown quiet and the watchmen make their silent circuits and the darkness has settled into its full depth. This is the hour after all of that. The hour when the night has been so thoroughly itself for so long that it seems impossible that anything else could follow. The hour that feels, from inside a deep sleep, like the very center of the world. The city of Rome in this hour was as quiet as it would ever be. The streets were empty of almost everything. The carts that had been making their deliveries through the earlier part of the night had completed their rounds and returned to wherever carts returned to. The taverns that had stayed open late had finally closed. The last of the night walkers had found their way home. The watchmen were in the deepest part of their vigil, moving slowly through streets that offered nothing to watch. Even the dogs were still. The fountains ran. They always ran, and in this profound stillness, their sound was the clearest it had been all night. Each individual stream of water dropping into its basin was audible. The sound of water meeting water, repeated over and over in fountains across the entire sleeping city, created a kind of music that no human being had composed and no human being could quite have imagined. The music of a city dreaming to itself in the last dark hour before morning. In the sleeping rooms, the people of Rome were in the deepest part of their sleep. The second sleep, for those who had woken and fallen back, had carried them down to a depth that the first sleep often did not reach. The brain, cycling through its nightly work, had by now completed some of the processing and sorting and consolidating that it does in the dark, and had reached the phase of sleep that feels, from the outside, like the most complete stillness a living body can achieve. Breathing slow, barely perceptible. The face in sleep has an expression that the waking face never quite achieves. All the small tensions that the waking face carries, the slight, habitual furrow between the brows, the almost imperceptible set of the jaw that reflects a particular way of meeting the world, the tension around the eyes that comes from decades of looking at things and reacting to them, all of this is gone. The sleeping face is the original face. The face before the world got to it. In the gardens of the city's wealthier houses, the night-blooming flowers had opened hours ago and were now fully present in the dark, releasing their fragrance to an audience of no one and everyone, the smell drifting over walls and into streets where no one was awake to receive it, except perhaps a passing cat, who paused, considered it briefly, and moved on. The stars above Rome in this last dark hour were at their zenith. The ones that had risen in the east at sunset had travelled their full arc and were descending now toward the western horizon. New stars had risen in the east to take their places in the slow celestial rotation that had been going on, uninterrupted, for longer than the human mind can comfortably contemplate. Orion, which had stood tall in the western sky in the earlier hours of the night, was now tilted toward the horizon, his familiar pattern leaning gently, as if he too were growing drowsy, as if even the constellations in this deepest hour before dawn were succumbing to a heaviness that had nothing to do with sleep, as we experience it, but everything to do with the great turning weight of time. Breathe. In and out. Notice how slowly you are breathing now. Notice how the breath has found a pace that requires nothing of you. It is not a pace you chose. It is a pace that the body chose for itself in the absence of any demand from the waking mind, the pace that the body always returns to when it is finally, completely allowed to be itself. The Romans in this hour were dreaming. The dreams of the last hour before dawn have a quality that early night dreams do not. They are sometimes more vivid, sometimes more strange. The mind, having completed its essential work, has loosened its grip on coherence slightly, allowing images and narratives to form that follow a logic entirely their own, a logic that makes perfect sense from the inside and dissolves entirely upon waking, leaving only a residue, a mood, a colour, the memory of having been somewhere that felt important without being able to say where or why. Someone in Rome is dreaming of water, a warm pool, perfectly still, perfectly clear, the light coming through it from some source that does not quite correspond to any real light, but that illuminates everything with a gold that is neither morning nor afternoon, but something outside of time entirely. Someone is dreaming of a garden that is larger than any garden they have ever been in, a garden that extends beyond what the eye can reach in all directions, filled with the smell of things growing and the sound of a fountain, somewhere ahead, always ahead, never quite arrived at, but always audible, always there. Someone is dreaming of walking. A long road through countryside that is familiar without being specifically remembered, the kind of landscape that exists in the deep memory of a species that spent most of its existence walking across just such terrain, hills and trees and grass and the sound of wind, the smell of earth, the feeling of a path underfoot that knows where it is going even when you do not. These are the dreams of the last hour before dawn. They are gifts, and you are in them or close to them in that territory where the boundary between dreaming and not dreaming has become so thin that you can no longer be sure which side you are on, which is exactly where you should be, exactly where the body and the mind have been trying to bring you all night, through all the chapters of this long and quiet journey. The city is dark. The fountains are running. The stars are completing their slow circle. The bread ovens, somewhere far across the city, are just beginning to be lit. But that is far away. That is the world of morning which has not yet begun. Here in this hour, in this room, in this darkness, the night still holds everything gently in its enormous, patient hands. There is nothing you need to do. There is nowhere you need to be. There is no version of yourself that is required right now. You can simply be the breathing, the warmth, the weight against the surface that holds you, the darkness behind closed eyes that is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence, not the end of something, but the deep still center of a night that has been all along exactly what you needed. The Romans knew this hour. They lay in it as you are lying in it now, carried in the same darkness, breathing the same way, their minds in the same borderless territory between the end of the night and the beginning of the day. 2,000 years between you, and in this hour, in this breath, in this particular quality of stillness. No distance at all. Let the night have you. It is almost done with its work. It has kept you safe through all the dark hours. It has held the stars in their places above the sleeping city. It has kept the fountains running and the watchmen walking and the bread ovens waiting for their morning fires. It has given you this rest, this quiet, this long, unhurried drift through the ancient dark. And soon, not yet, but soon, the sky will begin its slow transformation in the east. The black will soften. The stars nearest the horizon will begin to fade, not because they are gone, but because something brighter is coming. A grey that is almost blue. A blue that is almost lavender. And then the gold. But that is still ahead. That is still a long way away across the quiet. For now, there is only the last hour of the Roman night, and the darkness that is not empty, and the breath that goes on without asking permission, and the body lying still in its ancient knowledge that rest is not a luxury but a necessity, not an escape but a return, not an ending but the ground from which all beginnings grow. Sleep. Sleep through this last deep hour. Sleep while the fountains run and the stars turn and the city breathes in its ancient stones. Sleep while the night does its patient work around you. Sleep the way the Romans slept, without apology, without reservation, with the full surrender of a body that has done its work and earned its rest and now gives itself completely to the dark. The night is almost over, but not yet. Not yet. There is still time. There is still the quiet. There is still the dark. There is still you, and the breath, and the long, slow turning of the world beneath the fading stars. Rest now. The morning will find you. It always does.